Hello, welcome to Washington Talk. I'm Soo Kim. During President Joe Biden's first foreign trip, the U.S. aligned with European allies and partners, together calling on North Korea to commit to complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization. And in his first reaction to the Biden administration's new policy, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un said the country should be ready for both dialogue and confrontation. Today we'll discuss these and more. Joining me is Michael Madden. Mr. Madden is non-resident fellow at the Stimson-Center and director and founder of NK Leadership Watch, an intelligence website focused on North Korea. Soo Kim also joins me today. Ms. Kim is policy analyst at the RAND Corporation and adjunct instructor at American University. She served as an analyst at the Central Intelligence Agency and also worked at the Department of the Homeland Security. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
North Korean leader made the first reaction to the Biden administration's North Korean policy, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But first, President Joe Biden's trip to Europe. The North Korean nuclear issue was included both in the G7 and NATO joint communiques. Was this any different when we look back at the previous ones? Mr. Madden first.
I don't believe so. I mean, North Korea has made the NATO list for at least 10 years. I don't know if every joint communique that the DPRK has been on, but this is no surprise that they're on there. And I think it's probably also larger in line with the Biden administration's policies of shoring up alliances. And so North Korea is one of those major geopolitical issues where they're going to shore up their alliances as they would at NATO.
Mm-hmm. Ms. Kim, how was this any distinctive in your view?
So the 2017 NATO statement, I recall, called for CVID, the complete, verifiable, irreversible denuclearization of North Korea. And of course, North Korea doesn't make it into each one every yearly joint communiques. But I think the fact that the G7 and the NATO statements made explicit mention of North Korea, and not just on the nuclear weapons issue, can be seen as an emphasis, of course, on the international community's expectations about North Korea. That this year's statements opted to mention North Korea, I think also reflects prioritization. There was criticism, or I guess concerns, that the Biden administration, the emphasis on China was indicating that we were focusing less on North Korea. But I think the fact that we focused, or we talked about North Korea at the G7 and at NATO indicates that this is clearly not the case.
This G7 meeting and the NATO meeting, do you think this indicate how the U.S. will approach the North Korean issue? In a sense, it will take a more multilateral approach rather than bilateral?
Well, it certainly helps, I think, for Washington to present a collective approach towards North Korea, the nuclear and the human rights issues. It's also, I think, consistent with the Biden administration's retort to alliances and partnerships in dealing with broad challenges. But I don't think we should judge this as an emphasis over for one over the other. The past 7 decades of having to deal with North Korea, and it's a much broader problem, as it's proven over the years, and it's really underscored the need to to pursue this from a multifaceted, bilateral, multilateral, regional approach to deal with the regimes. But the Biden administration has not only to approach this from a U.S. North Korea perspective, but it also needs to incorporate the interests and also, I think, from a U.S. perspective, the stakes and also some of the vulnerabilities that are entailed in dealing with North Korea from the perspectives of Seoul, from Tokyo, from Beijing, from Moscow, and elsewhere.
The United States is going to be taking a multilateral approach, both with the allies, with Japan and ROC in the neighborhood, but also with China and Russia. I think that's something that will happen at some level, whether it's rhetorical, or performative, but there is going to be something, because Russia and China don't like North Korea having nuclear weapons, but Russia and China also don't like multilateral alliances telling them what to do or telling them what to do in their spheres of influence. So.
Then, Mr. Madden, do you expect to see something similar to the six-party talks we saw in the past?
If denuclearization negotiations resurface at some point in the next couple of years, I mean, the six-party talks is the only way, or maybe the best way, to get these different groups together. Now, I don't know if they'll formally call them the six-party talks, or China's going to host them or something like that. But that's really the only sensible sort of framework that we have to have all the different countries talking to each other, interacting, even if it's not all six at the same time. But that's the that's sort of a twig that ties a whole bundle of sticks, if you will.
Mm-hmm. And now North Korean leader Kim Jong-un presided over a key party meeting, and Kim Jong-un said the country should be ready for both dialogue and, more importantly, confrontation with the United States. Ms. Kim, which is North Korea more inclined to do, dialogue or confrontation?
I don't think that this is a dramatic change from the North Korean behavior that we've seen so far. If anything, it's just a reaffirmation. Kim knows that he's dealing with a new U.S. team that's much different from the Trump administration. So it's a courteous reminder to Washington, to Seoul, to other countries that North Korea is not going to budge. If the countries are so desirous of negotiations and dialogue with Pyongyang, then they need to conform. And he's got the strategic and the tactical tools at his disposal to make this happen. I think the question then is, how is the United States and South Korea going to respond? We've seen that the Biden administration is not going to be willing to concede to Kim Jong-un. He made it pretty clear during his summit with President Moon Jae-in. From South Korea's optics, I think we're going to see still more hand-wringing because we're nearing the end of the Moon Jae administration's term. So this is going to probably press the Moon administration to try to pursue other desperate measures to get North Korea's attention. But Kim has also made it clear that it's going to take a lot to drag him out again to the dialogue table and to hash out some kind of a deal. And this time, the deal is probably not going to be conducive or favorable for Kim Jong-un's objectives.
Mr. Madden, how would you interpret what Kim Jong-un said about dialogue and confrontation?
It's the same old song. There's some sort of like style book that they have in the ideological offices in the Central Committee, and they picked out some rhetoric and put it in a speech. I don't see anything new about this. He's giving himself it's sort of media messaging, and so he's sort of writing a little narrative with that rhetoric, and maybe that's something we need to look for. But if we go, and I think November 2021, I think we'll be at 4 or 5 years. 4 years of the self-imposed moratorium on this testing. So I think he's giving himself that kind of wiggle room. When he says, especially confrontation, that was the phrase, especially confrontation. But there's nothing new. We're going to hear all about the U.S. hostile policy against the DPRK and stuff. There's nothing, there's no other ground really for North Korea to pursue rhetorically or geostrategically. We've done everything in the book. If we think about it, we've done working level negotiations, we've done agreed framework, and now we did game show summit meetings, right, with the last administration, and so at this point, North Korea doesn't have any other options when we're talking about raising strategic rhetoric arguments. There's nothing else they have. They have to, as I say, go back to the same song that they've been going on for a while with this.
So, Mr. Madden, you think we shouldn't read too much into the fact that he mentioned dialogue?
I mean, North Korea always mentions dialogue. I mean, we can go back. We could go back to the good old days of 2010 with the Cheonan and the Yeonpyeong Island shelling, and North Korea issued statements saying we're prepared for dialogue and confrontation. We're prepared. It's just a rhetorical phrase. It's a phrase that they use. So there is dialogue, and it is possible for North Korea to engage in WMD or ballistic missile testing and engage in diplomatic negotiations. We saw that in 2006. North Korea conducted its first nuclear test on the 9th of October 2006, and the six-party talks were going on at the time. So that is something possible. Between North Korea doing confrontation, that's possible, but. As I said, I wouldn't really be making any plans in the State Department to be talking to North Korea anytime soon.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't keep my calendar open, right?
All right. According to the state media, Kim Jong-un gave a detailed analysis of the Biden administration's North Korean policy and laid out appropriate strategic and tactical counteraction. Mr. Madden, what kind of counteraction is he talking about? Reaching back to the U.S. for diplomacy or getting prepared for provocations or both?
It's probably both. I mean, when we're looking at counteraction, we just look at the definition of a counteraction. So you get a statement from a senior U.S. government official, then you get a statement from Choi Sun-hui, or you get a statement from some other senior North Korean official. That's a counteraction. It's just done with rhetoric and media releases or media readouts. So I think when we're looking at that, we might be counteraction sort of, I guess you could say he's going to involve joint ROC U.S. military exercises at some point. Maybe that's a counteraction. Maybe he's talking about something in the cyber realm. We're always thinking about missile tests and artillery shells when we're thinking about North Korean provocations. Maybe he's thinking of something in the cyber realm, and all of our computers are going to get hacked in a second because I said that. But that there's any number of things, and but as I say, a lot of this is rhetoric. If you put thumb screws on me, I tell you, I don't think Kim Jong-un really knows what he's doing and has no idea what he wants out of any of these things, out of any of this process. I think the only thing that he knows and that senior North Korean policymakers know is that we do a pretty good job testing these ballistic missiles, and we do a good job making WMDs. So we're going to stick with that. We're going to go with what we know.
Ms. Kim, your thought?
I think when it comes to the strategic and the tactical options he has, of course, he's got the weapons, of course, and as Mr. Madden pointed out, we also have North Korea developing its cyber weapons capabilities or cyber threats. So dealing with North Korea, as I want to reemphasize, is that it's not just about the weapons, it's not just about the cyber strategy, but it's a multitude of issues that continues, I think, to it takes different forms. With the advent of the pandemic, we're seeing that the typical way that we deal with these issues is not going to work, which is why the administration is emphasizing the alliances, the partnerships, and trying for, we haven't seen, of course, the full policy unveiled, but going for this flexible approach where I don't think it's exactly strategic patience, and it's certainly not maximum pressure, but somewhere in between where it's more calibrated and it leaves the door open for contingencies, because that's clearly how the North Koreans operate. They have a strategy that really hasn't changed over the decades. Perhaps the United States, South Korea, and other interested parties should also take this long-term approach in dealing with North Korea.
Mm-hmm. And during this key party meeting in North Korea, the food shortage problem seems to have been the critical topic at the meeting, as Kim Jong-un warned the North Korean people about the tense food situation. Ms. Kim, do you see any possibility North Korea being open to humanitarian aid or some kind of outside economic support?
What we're seeing from Kim Jong-un, not just now, but of course over the recent years, is that it's all rhetoric, and this rhetoric of underscoring difficulties and hardships is telling the North Korean population, of course, that he's quote unquote paying attention to it. It's also telling them that the onus is not on Kim Jong-un, but it's on the North Korean people to try to fix this situation. So he's also encouraging greater loyalty towards the regime. It's indoctrination. So this purpose in talking about the food shortages is not for Kim Jong-un to actually try to fix the situation from the domestic perspective. From the external perspective, it's a way, of course, to remind his neighbors and the United States that things are not looking good. He does need aid, but he's not going to be begging for it. He wants to signal, and he wants to give countries like South Korea and international relief workers the opportunity to pitch in. And this opportunity has to be timed well so that Kim Jong-un is going to pick it up when he wants it. It's again, everything really depends on when Kim Jong-un wants to do it and how he wants to do it. So he's going to continue signaling, but it's not a signaling that appeals to, let's say, I want to open my country economically, politically, so that we're not only going to get these temporary bandages put on our situation, but for long-lasting corrective changes to be made so that the lives of North Korean citizens will actually be dramatically improved.
Mr. Madden, is North Korea willing to open its doors, even if it's little, in order to ease the tough economic situation?
I don't think so in terms of any sort of macroeconomic policy. I think if any opening up happens at the DPRK for the next 5 to 10 years, it's most likely going to involve the so-called mosquito net policy of special administrative trade zones and special administrative tourist zones, things like Regin Sungbong, and I think we heard something about Sinwiju opening an area in Sinwiju up in North Gyeongsang province. It's not really in Kim Jong-un's political interest to necessarily improve the economic situation overall in North Korea. What his interest immediately is to improve or to have people subordinate to him. He was very clear about that at a Politburo meeting last week, that it was the senior officials and not himself that was responsible for the people's livelihoods and implementing these policies. So it doesn't politically touch him. But no, he has no interest. I mean, he needs to stabilize the food security situation, maybe the price of commodities as they're available in the country, and that's what he needs to worry about for the time being. But he's not necessarily, I don't believe that he's necessarily going to lose sleep over this per se. He's got other people that are going to lose sleep over this, or we'll get some pictures or hear rumors about them receiving a lot of nutritional assistance and energy assistance from China. And that's a subsistence level. Kim Jong-un doesn't have to sell out his interest. He doesn't have to give Beijing any sort of political influence in Pyongyang among the elites. If he does just basic maintenance, subsistence agreement that China and North Korea have, because they're countries that border one another, and one's in better shape than the other. And also, we're looking at the anniversary of the CPC, the Communist Party of China, this year. And the North Koreans and the Chinese are going to really wave that solidarity flag this year. And so we have to look at that. So I think North Korea is probably good for some more assistance under the guise of solidarity, resist America, aid Korea, I guess, just with nutritional assistance. But I think that's what's going to be. There's no macro policy that's going to come out of any of this.
Soo Kim, U.S. Special Representative for North Korea, is visiting South Korea. This is his first visit to South Korea after his appointment as the Special Envoy. Ms. Kim, what do you expect from Soo Kim's visit?
I don't expect too much in terms of deliverables. I think we're still pretty early in the Biden administration for the three sides to actually come to a plan of attack, not just in dealing with North Korea, but other regional challenges, and more fundamentally, some of the issues that sort of remain stuck between the United States and South Korea, and of course, South Korea and Japan. So I think this is, again, a way for the three countries to coordinate, to verify their positions, and from Washington's perspective, being sort of in this fulcrum between Seoul and Tokyo, it's a way for the United States to remind its two allies what's important, of course, in terms of regional challenges, but also to reconfirm, to reaffirm their positions, and to make sure that the past 4 years under the Trump administration, we're basically starting from scratch. And it's a way for Washington to recommunicate that this is a new administration, different policies, different optics, and for three countries to get together at this time is, again, it's just the beginning of, I think, many steps that are going to be following over the next 4 years.
Mr. Madden, do you think there will be any kind of communication between Soo Kim and the North Korean side?
During his trip with North Korea, I don't think so. I think if we're lucky, as North Korea watchers, right, as if we're lucky, maybe the North Koreans will say, the North Koreans will most definitely say something, and we could get a little more rhetoric and have an idea as to what how the U.S. policy review is going on in North Korea, and get some clues about that, I guess. I think one of the things we're looking at, one of the things the analyst and commentator community is kind of, I think, making too much of is that Soo Kim is a part-time ambassador, and the North Koreans aren't going to take that very well, or they're not going to respect that. Maybe North Korea will talk about that, but I mean, it's one of these things where you kind of like roll your eyes. It's, pick your battle.
North Korea has finally started to make its moves. It is early to determine whether this is a positive sign or just a repeat of the previous position. As North Korea's economy continues to suffer, Kim Jong-un is watched keenly as to what kind of path he will choose going forward. Mr. Madden and Ms. Kim, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Right.
And that does it for this week's Washington Talk from Voice of America. Please join us again next week for more analysis.